This is Richard Lee with Sound Vitality, and I am here to present to you today what is this concept of comfort foods that we talk about. It's a word that's in our vocabulary, and so I looked it up. I started studying it, and I also want to compare it to wholesome breakfasts because both are unconscious, conditioned responses of the cells of our body that cause behavior changes. So let's start with wholesome breakfasts. Have you ever thought what the word wholesome means relative to breakfast? Wholesome seems to be a pretty meaningless term. It sounds good, wholesome, but it really doesn't mean anything. So why do we associate wholesome breakfast with some kind of breakfast? And what do we associate with it? Well, obviously, a wholesome breakfast includes bacon and eggs or bacon and sausage. And that's most of it. We might throw in hash browns or something like that. But it seems like the bacon and eggs is the standard wholesome breakfast. Now, this is kind of interesting because before 1920 in the United States, there was no wholesome breakfast. People ate maybe some fruit, maybe a roll, maybe some porridge, and maybe a cup of coffee. That was a standard American breakfast before 1920, and it is still a standard breakfast in the rest of the world. If you go to restaurants in other countries, you can order what's called an American breakfast and get bacon and eggs. But okay, so what happened? How did this happen? Okay, bring in Edward Bernays. He was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and he was fascinated by this conditioned response. Can we control mass behaviors through programming a conditioned response into people? He believed, so he's basically a master of operant conditioning, and he's considered the father of modern public relations. What is it? Madison Avenue. Okay, so what he managed to do was to start. He was hired by a meat packer, a company that wanted to sell more pork, and he was hired to expand the market for pork. So this clever guy decided, let's invent wholesome breakfast and ask 10 doctors, what do you think? Do you think increasing the amount of protein in a breakfast would make it more of a wholesome breakfast? And the doctors naturally responded, well, yeah, I guess so. And so he took this result from 10 doctors and put it in magazines across the country. Doctors declare bacon and eggs a wholesome breakfast. And we've forgotten that history, but if you look at how many people are into bacon and eggs as a wholesome breakfast, it is quite incredible. It is the American lifestyle. So he was successful at programming the entire country to believe that wholesome breakfast equals bacon and eggs equals excellent health. Some people have discovered that bacon and eggs are not the answer that's presented to be, but still, the tradition is bacon and eggs, and it is strong. A very interesting situation is the relationship of the circulatory system to the emotional body. We have emotional experiences, whereas the nervous system is a system that is the communication system where all of our cells get together and communicate through the nervous system, and it's our physical consciousness. In a physical day-to-day world, that's the consciousness we live in. And then we have our heart and circulatory system that create this big magnetic field. The blood is very magnetic. It has lots of iron in it, and it circulates throughout the body. And you can measure a magnetic field from the heart 10 feet away from the body. And in fact, you can measure separate magnetic fields from each internal organ of the body, which is fascinating. So basically, this whole magnetic system, the circulatory system, becomes our emotional consciousness. The blood flows and we experience our emotional life. Okay, well, that's all good, but that can be upset. Just like electrical voltages and different sorts of things can upset our electrical communication. If the blood is not balanced correctly, if we don't have blood that is ideal to create this magnetic emotional life around us, we lose focus on our emotional system. And that happens to be a wonderful thing if somebody is going through emotional turmoil. They would love to have their emotional body sort of switched off into confusion so they don't have to be so acutely aware of the emotional pain they're experiencing. Okay, so now we're getting to something very interesting. Most foods you eat, and virtually all natural foods that you eat, whole foods, raw foods, go into the digestive system and are digested by the digestive system, and slowly nutrients, sugars and different sorts of things, are introduced into the bloodstream to maintain the ideal blood flow or blood concentration of chemicals to nurture all the cells in the body and to create this magnetic field. But there are some man-made chemicals that don't get digested by the digestive system, so are not monitored, not controlled as they enter the bloodstream. Okay, and they can just go into the bloodstream and mess up the blood sugar balance or the blood everything balance, and then suddenly people are not aware of their emotional pain. So that's very interesting. First, I'm going to look at what does not go directly into the bloodstream. Sugar is a glucose and a fructose stuck together. So it's a big molecule, and it will not pass through the intestine wall into the bloodstream. Its assimilation into the body is controlled by the digestion. So it is not one of the problems. Whole grains, complex carbohydrates, are digested slowly, so carbohydrates are released slowly into the body. Vegetables also, and fruit, even though it contains fructose that is capable of going right into the body, fruit is digested, except for bananas and dried fruit like figs and raisins, which are full of sucrose and already soft digested. They can go right into the bloodstream and create an imbalance if you eat enough of them. It doesn't really take much of the raisins and figs and things because they're concentrated, dried, product of human creation. Okay, so what does penetrate through the gut into the bloodstream immediately? First, high fructose corn syrup, a creation of science, which is high in fructose. The fructose dives in right through into the bloodstream, pumps up fructose level in the bloodstream. Suddenly we have a spiking of a sugar that is not normally so heavy in the bloodstream, and the body's systems are set up to control glucose level, but they're not set up to control sucrose levels. It's very difficult to control sucrose. So it just goes right in and throws the circulatory system off. Alcohol goes right through and throws the circulatory system off. Now, processed white flour, aged flour, bleached flour, flour that's been oxidized, creates a whole bunch of small carbohydrates that just go right into the bloodstream. There's still some big pieces that stay in the digestive system and are digested. But basically, the highly processed, stored long shelf life foods have a lot of these particles that just go into the body and throw off the balance of the bloodstream. And also fried oils, French fries, creates all kinds of frazzled, short little oil molecules that can penetrate right through into the bloodstream. You've probably experienced drinking at a fast food restaurant, drinking a chocolate malt or eating a cheeseburger with sauces and things, artificial sauces and, of course, artificial cheese. And then you find yourself coughing. You've got some phlegm that you cough up just because you ate that fast food. That's some of that oil that penetrates right through the gut into the bloodstream. So all of these things throw off the balance of the circulatory system so that a coherent magnetic emotional body cannot be maintained, which means that if you have painful emotions, you can go to these foods, eat them, and be thrown off and not feel your woes for a little while. Each time we do it, each time we bury our woes, our emotional misery in these foods, we are programming our bodies to say, this is the way to protect myself from painful emotions, unconsciously. And so our bodies just crave them more and more. Okay, so that's where comfort food comes in, and I was quite surprised to discover that. Okay, now, what do we do about it? Well, we can continue to eat comfort food, but that leaves these unconscious emotions in our bodies, and that's not going to do very well. So first thing we can do is become aware that feeling the emotion, when an emotion comes up, if we will just feel it, rather than trying to hide it, bury it, anything else, if we will just feel it, it will tend to dissipate. This is a wonderful tool because if we try to ignore it, if we try to hide it, if we try to bury it, if we try to make it go away with comfort foods, it tends to just get bigger and create other sorts of problems. So allowing it simply to come up, feeling the pain, and deciding that it's okay to feel pain and to cry or to have a period of remorse or grief or whatever it is, that's quite important because we walk through it. And on the other side, we leave it behind. So that's a much healthier way than the comfort foods to deal with very uncomfortable emotions. Now, fortunately, the infratonic, which you're familiar with, is very good putting the infratonic over the thymus, over the upper chest, and just relaxing. It helps to calm the emotions. It helps to stabilize this magnetic field. It helps to soften the really painful part of the emotion so that we can walk through it more easily and feel it and get through it. And it also, using the infratonic, speeds the processing speed so we can get through uncomfortable emotions faster. So I would, of course, recommend the infratonic as opposed to comfort foods in order to provide a more permanent long-term solution to dealing with uncomfortable emotions. Now there's another area again, which is the programmed unconscious reactivity of the cells, which can inherit from our ancestors or gain from early childhood traumatic experiences. And that can keep bringing things up, and it's very hard to figure out what we're feeling because it's so, basically it happened before we can remember, or it even happened to our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and our cells are still programmed in that. So there, the Nesser therapy that we've talked about in previous webinars is a very effective way to soften these unconscious reactive programs and bring it to light and to bring calmness to our lives. Oh, the blood being metal, how is this affected by the infratonic? I like that question. Yes, the blood does contain hemoglobin that is strongly iron, has a lot of iron in it. And when you apply the infratonic to the thymus, all the blood that's produced by the heart flows through that area of the thymus and becomes basically harmonized with the infratonic and then circulates through the body. So that's one way where it directly connects. The magnetic field of the infratonic directly harmonizes the blood of the body. But it also works with the overall field. This is a center of the field that can be calmed with the infratonic. So that's a good question, Suzanne, thank you. So this is why we feel so relaxed? Okay, so relaxation to me is the opposite of stress, and stress is a lot of tornadoes, a lot of vortexes in this magnetic emotional field, and the infratonic, because it's an unpredictable signal, tends to break up these tornadoes and slow them down and relax them so that we have one comfortable field. And that to me is why we feel so relaxed, because this magnetic field comes into a state of relaxation. Okay, now we have the question, what's the body's reaction to bananas and figs? And in my study of fruit, because fruit is often attacked as something that's full of fructose and therefore dangerous. And so I thought, that's interesting. I wonder what's true there. And so what I found is that most fruit has quite a low glycemic index. It is, the fructose is in the tissue of the fruit, and you eat it, and then the body digests the carbohydrate and releases the sugars in the process of digestion, which slows the rate at which the fructose comes into the body. So it's regulated if we eat it in whole fruits. But if you take fruit, put it in the blender, and blend it all up, you're breaking up all of that fiber, and then you can drink it and directly influence, fill the body full of fructose. And as far as, and I discovered that bananas seem to be one with a high glycemic index, which means that the blood sugar level rises quickly when you eat them. And then figs and raisins and dried fruit are oxidized. They've had a lot of time that the oxygen of the air can work on them. Concentrated sugars, concentrated fructose, so that they don't need to be digested by the digestive system to release their sugars and the fructose and go straight into the circulatory system. So most fruit, if you eat whole fruit, is digested slowly and the body can control it. But when you blend up fruit or eat dried, concentrated fruit, then you can create these issues. Are you talking about fresh figs or dried figs? We're talking about dried figs, concentrated. If you get a good fresh fig, it is still alive, it's still coherent, and digestion is likely to be far more controlled than with the dried fig, where the oxidation goes in and sort of complex, to the extent that fruit has complex carbohydrate, it's broken down as well, so it just sort of disintegrates quickly in the digestive system.